Good to see you.
Good to see you, Maria.
So you sold Second Market, which you founded, and that was a total great innovation. And now you're on to this new company, Digital Currency. Tell us what it's about. What are you doing?
Yep. So we are building and investing in Bitcoin companies. Most active investor in the space. So we've invested in 60 companies. We've also launched a Bitcoin ETF-like vehicle called the Bitcoin Investment Trust, and it's traded publicly. Simple GBTC.
How will the financial services industry change in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the definition of a bank is going to change. Banks are being disintermediated. They're being attacked from every different angle, from very smart startups all the way up to different types of approaches to finance, like Bitcoin, like digital currency. The thing that's exciting about Bitcoin is it's going to change the way that people send money, spend money, even think about money. It's kind of redefining what is money.
So, Barry, one of the things I try to understand when I'm looking at Bitcoin is what's more valuable here, the technology, what's called blockchain technology, which is a way of exchanging information, or the currency itself. I'm a little skeptical when I hear people say that this currency is going to replace the dollar someday, but it seems like the technology itself is really valuable.
Well, this is the big debate right now, and if you've kind of been following the headlines, a lot of Wall Street banks are getting very excited about using the technology to create more efficiency in the way that they trade assets and clear and settle assets. But I think the reason why people are so excited about Bitcoin, the currency, is if you look around the world today, you have many, many different currencies that are basically being debased or printed out of existence. And so if you can hold something that has a lot of characteristics similar to gold, which Bitcoin does, it's an attractive alternative to those currencies. So frankly, I'm a believer in both the technology as well as the currency itself. And frankly, the technology doesn't work without the currency that moves on top of it.
But the gold price has collapsed 40% in the last couple of years, and the value of the dollar is going up. When I'd like to ask you to speak to that, and also when you're investing in these companies, are you investing in the technology? Is that where you think you're going to get the payoff?
Yeah, so we're investing in both. I mean, we're very much investing in the ecosystem, the exchanges, the wallets, the merchant processors, and we own Bitcoin as well. And I think if you look at the price of gold over the past few years, it certainly has not performed very well, but Bitcoin is up a few thousand%. Now, it's still very small. There's only $5 billion of Bitcoin in circulation, but there's $7 trillion of gold. So if you have 5% of gold move into Bitcoin over the next decade, that's $350 billion moving into Bitcoin.
Barry, I want to ask you about the future of regulation of fintech, right? I get it. This is going to change the financial industry, but banks are so highly regulated. We have to pass stress tests and we have to have appropriate capital ratios. But then when you hear stories about somebody going online and getting a mortgage loan just like this within a couple of seconds, and maybe they pay their closing fee with Bitcoin, I mean, what's the risk there? What are the regulators paying close attention to, or are they?
Well, they're certainly paying attention. And I think the reality, though, is I used to think that regulation was Bitcoin's biggest threats. I actually think it's the biggest opportunity now. Because to your point, running a bank, operating a bank, you cannot be innovative. You can't think outside the box. You can't do anything creative. Whereas you have hundreds of thousands of startups around the world that are looking to, again, kind of disintermediate. To your point about kind of new mortgage origination processes and payments around Bitcoin, it is really going to eat banks alive, and they're going to have to change or be put out of business.
So we were just showing the value of Bitcoin, and when Bitcoin reached that spike and everybody was talking about it, was on the cover of every newspaper, all of a sudden you started to see a lot of places that were accepting Bitcoin, like airlines, for example, started doing it. We sort of saw that go away. Where do you see the most transactions take place using Bitcoin?
So we've invested in companies in 20 countries, and so we're seeing dramatic adoption in places like Kenya, in Argentina, in Brazil, in South Africa, places where people have mobile devices, but they don't have bank accounts.
But to buy what? What transactions? I mean, are you talking about stores? What kind of stores? Is it travel? What are they using it for?
Well, a lot of it is for cross-border payments. It's for remittance. And there's $500 billion a year sent around the world, and they're paying 8 to 10% to Western unions. With Bitcoin, it's free and it's instantaneous.
What I like about it is the anonymity of it, and that's what I think people have have been attracted to Bitcoin. Is that right?
It's sort of anonymous, but actually every transaction in Bitcoin is on this open ledger Bitcoin ledger system, and so you can actually trace it around. And so this Greek story about these banks, being held for ransom for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a terrible way to pay ransom because ultimately the good guys can catch the bad guys because everything ultimately is traceable.
Right, that's a good point. Those are some stupid thieves, by the way.
Yeah, I want to come back to, you said $5 billion. That's a tiny amount. Just to put that in perspective, we're talking about, the dollars in circulation is $3 trillion. So we're talking about a very tiny slice of the financial system.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit that Bitcoin, as a digital currency, is either going to be worth zero or it's going to be worth a whole lot more money than it is today. It's a very, very risky investment. But this ecosystem is amazing that's being built. There's been $1 billion invested by venture capital in this industry so far.
Why haven't we seen more of a disruption in financial services? I feel like that's one area that really hasn't been disrupted as much as other areas as a result of technology. I know you think we're on the cusp of it.
Right. Well, I think huge moats have been built, whether it's capital or regulation, or really it's trust. I mean, ultimately, you have to have trust in a system. And right now, I think the trust is, I don't know if it's at an all-time low, but it's not very high in the banking space.
So I saw that MasterCard, along with Bain Capital, is one of your biggest sources of funding for your group. What interest do they have in it?
Well, yes, we raised money from MasterCard, from New York Life, Transamerica, CIBC, CME Group, and they were interested in learning about the space. They're excited about the opportunities. They're certainly curious about the risks. And so we give them and investors a great way to figure out what's happening and what they should do.
So CME Group's interested from what angle? From making it an open market?
They look at it from an exchange perspective, from a clearing and settlement perspective, from a derivatives perspective. Yep.
Is this a way, for them to get, in particular on MasterCard, for them to get in to block any change? So, Maria talks about why hasn't this disrupted the financial industry. There's, they want to put up barriers to entry. So is this a way for MasterCard to get in and figure out what kind of barriers they should put up?
I certainly hope not.
Yeah. So the financial services industry, how does it look different in 5 years?
Well, I think you're going to see the whole capital formation process change, where the way the companies raise money, the way that shares get traded or different assets get traded, the way that clearing and settlement happens. But I think the biggest change is going to happen in money, in the way that money moves around the world. There's just a lot of businesses that are trying to change the way that you send money cross-border, person to person. And frankly, there's so much friction and so much cost in the system. There's a big, big opportunity for disruption there.
So we're going to be in a place where I could just zap you $100 to pay for that bet we had on fantasy football.
Well, you can do it right now. Yeah, I mean, with Bitcoin, I could be in Hong Kong or I could be sitting across the table from you, and it's instantaneous and it's free.
But it hasn't the biggest drawback to using Bitcoin is that it is anonymous and it is hard to track, and hasn't been the reason why the regulators maybe have not approved it for more widely circulated use, because they can't track it. They don't know if it's John transferring money to you, or if it's a potential terrorist suspect transferring money to somewhere else.
And so I don't know where this misinformation came from, and that's kind of the general view, but it's actually not accurate. The UK Treasury just came out with a report listing kind of the tools that bad guys use to do bad things. Mm-hmm. Banks were number 1. Number 9 was physical cash, and number 10 was Bitcoin. So if you think about the alternatives to something like Bitcoin, look, $100 bills is a great way to do bad things. It's not traceable. Bitcoin is forever traceable on this ledger system.
So is it more vulnerable to hacking?
Well, Bitcoin has grown up in a period of time where hackers have gone after people who own Bitcoin, trying to steal their Bitcoins. The businesses that have been launched have spent a lot of time focusing on security, where the existing system has been built over decades and hasn't really kind of built kind of the same hardened systems that the Bitcoin industry has. So it's still absolutely subject to hacking, but the Bitcoin network itself has never been hacked, has never been insecure.
So we've been talking a lot about Bitcoin, but you mentioned there's 500 digital currencies.
Yes,
is that right?
Yeah, and it's very easy to start a new digital currency. But the thing with money is what society decides it is. In history, it's been wampum, it's been rocks, it's been salt, it's been gold to a certain extent. And today, people think that Bitcoin is potentially a new form of a global currency and have bet $5 billion on it, basically.
Amazing.